Welcome to the Sports Ethicist Show, coming to you from the basement of Berkeley on the campus of Rockford University in Sportstown, USA, Rockford, Illinois. I am Shawn Klein, the Sports Ethicist. The Sports Ethicist Show discusses the many ethical and philosophical issues that arise in and around sport. You can read the Sports Ethicist blog at sportsethicist.com, where you can also download podcasts of previous shows, subscribe to the podcast, or find links to related information. The Sports Ethicist is also on Facebook and Twitter, and you can email the show at sportsethicist@gmail.com. Today's show features Dr. Joan Forry. Dr. Joan Forry earned her Ph.D. in philosophy from Temple University in 2008, where she wrote her dissertation entitled The Gender Politics of Contemporary Sport, Ethics, Power, and the Body. Since 2006, she has regularly taught courses in sports ethics and sports philosophy. Her essay, Towards a Somatic Sport Feminism, was recently published in the book Pragmatism and Philosophy of Sport. She is member at large on the Executive Council for the International Association for the Philosophy of Sport. Just a quick note before we begin, the phone connection isn't great, and so there is some feedback on the line. I hope it isn't too distracting. I apologize if it is. So hi, Joan. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Shawn.
So our topic today is your upcoming talk at the International Association for the Philosophy of Sport, Should Women Play American Football? And, you know, I saw you posted that online, or the title of it, and it intrigued me. So I got in touch with you and asked you to be on the show, and you graciously agreed. So I was wondering if you could summarize the main idea of your paper.
Sure. The question that I'm asking, should women play American football? I mean, it's a general question. The way that you commonly see it phrased in popular discourse is, should women be allowed to play American football, specifically tackle football? And the motivation for the project came out of a YouTube video that was posted last November of this 9-year-old girl named Samantha Gordon, who her father uploaded a highlight reel. And within a few hours, it got tons of hits. I mean, she's a superstar. Last season she had 35 touchdowns, 65 tackles, and 232 carries.
She's fast, too. I watched the videos.
Oh, yeah? Good.
And I'll, for our listeners, I'll post the links to the YouTube video on the website. And she's amazing. She's so. Although I have to say, watching like the 9-year-olds play football with the full uniforms is really kind of freaky.
Yeah.
You just get these little bodies with these big heads because of their helmets, and they're just running around all over the place. It really was kind of freaky to watch. But she is amazing. I mean, she's very fast and gave as good as it gets, and it was fun to watch the videos. But so go on.
Oh yeah, it's a great video, and it's and watching the 9-year-olds play, and it's quite an experience. Like, you just see their little legs running as fast as they can.
Yeah.
And and the refs trying to keep up with her in particular. So it got the YouTube video got some national press coverage, including on ESPN, and they did a 7-minute segment on First Take, and the response by the sports commentators is not very good at all.
No, they were pretty stupid.
Yeah, they were. The arguments given were. It was so infuriating to me. What they were saying in response to this highlight reel of this little girl. And I've been teaching this book called Playing with the Boys, Why Separate is Not Equal in Sports, for a couple years in my sports ethics class. And the authors have what they call the 3 I's to try and explain, or to try to capture the arguments for why sports are sex segregated. And the 3 I's are injury, immorality and inferiority. So the arguments given are, well, girls and boys shouldn't play together because girls will get injured. Girls and boys shouldn't play together because it's immoral for them to play together, especially in high-contact sports or very physical sports. There's some kind of sexual element that should be avoided. And then inferiority is that girls and boys shouldn't play together because girls are athletically inferior to boys and they would not be able to keep up with the boys. And that would be bad for lots of reasons. It would be bad for their self-esteem, etc. Mm-hmm. So I'm taking a look at the response to, Sam Gordon's highlight reel and a couple other cases where girls have attempted to play American football, play with the boys, and what the responses have been. And that's what the project is about. It's trying to tease out why some of the arguments are not very good, but also to address some other arguments about why girls and women should not play tackle football, which are actually grounded in more, in more of a feminist perspective. They shouldn't be engaging in tackle football or aggressive sports because these sports don't advance good qualities for human beings, which seems to be a little bit more sound, but that's what I'm kind of looking at in the paper.
Now, on the latter point, is that critique solely focused on women playing in those, or just human beings in general playing? So is it a critique against violent or dangerous sports in general, or is it that women shouldn't be playing those sports?
It turns out to be more that human beings shouldn't be engaging in these activities in general.
Okay.
And it arises kind of out of some of the literature on militarism and feminist responses against militarism. So it is kind of more of a humanist critique than it is distinctly feminist, but it's not exclusive to women.
Okay.
It's that human beings in general, we shouldn't be engaging in these activities that encourage violence, and that's one of the key terms that pops up in these arguments. However, I'm cautious against in using that term because I have a particular view about what constitutes violence in sports.
It's a tricky concept. I mean, to try to employ here, because it does come with a lot of conceptual baggage when we think of violence. It sort of comes with a distinctively negative connotation oftentimes. But I think when we talk about the violence in football or hockey or lacrosse or something like that, it isn't necessarily intended to bring those. So there often isn't a good alternative word, though. So
right.
John Russell talks about dangerous sports in his article,
right,
defending things like football, and that might be a better term, because that's the concern. I think, at least in a lot of people, is that it's something that is causing people harm from the danger that it poses, which often comes from physical violence. But I see your point about wanting to be careful about the term violence there. But that's an interesting issue in terms of the critique, because I think that's something that comes out in the first take with Stephen A. Smith's critique of having women play against men in sport, was that it, in the sense that, I don't know if you picked up on this, but that his argument would seem not to apply only to women, but as a general critique against football in general.
Yeah, exactly. And the kind of the inherent assumptions about about all kinds of things kind of come out in his response. And there's a recent case that I think is really, really interesting. There's she's 12, Maddie Page, and she went to the name of the school is Strong Rock Christian. She's a 7th grader in Georgia, and she played. She was playing football, doing very well. Really, is enjoying the sport, doing so well that the coach put her on defense. And her mom came to pick her up one day, and she saw that she was like tackling guys on the defensive line.
Right.
And she was like, "What are you doing?" And the coach came over and said, "What can I say? Girl can hit."
Yeah.
And she's loving it. And then the school CEO said that he prayed and God spoke to him and said that it was immoral for her to play on the boys' team, that it was going to be very difficult for her to continue to play for the school because there's this issue of, the locker room, and that the 7th grade boys are at this age where they're going to start having impure thoughts about girls, and so he instituted this rule that basically has barred her from playing football anymore. And
if this was a video podcast instead of a radio podcast, you'd see my head hitting the desk several times.
Yeah, it's really. Yeah, that's my response to my stuttering over my words right now is just pure rage.
Well, I never really had much struck for those kinds of arguments from. I hesitate to even say from the immorality aspect of it. I know that the McDonough and Papano, is that the authors of?
Yeah.
That they use that term immorality to capture that aspect of the argument because of the close physical contact. And I know there was a case within the last year or two, and that probably comes up often, where a male wrestler refuses to wrestle a female wrestler for quote unquote religious reasons or moral reasons or something like that. And I mean, that if that person, that boy wrestler feels that way, I have no problem with him taking himself out. But to impose that religious viewpoint on everybody else seems unfair. I mean, and how far do you push that? Or do we have to move NFL always to Sunday because you don't want it to Monday because Sunday is Christian Sabbath and you can't have Saturday games because it's the Jewish Sabbath and so on. And if individuals have religious beliefs that might be interpreted to prohibit them from engaging in certain activities, then that's their prerogative, but that shouldn't be imposed on anybody else.
And it echoes with Stephen. I mean, that rationale echoes Stephen A. Smith's response that the boys that are hitting young girls in football practice, once they get to be older, they're going to have a hard time telling the difference that it's on and off the field. They might be more prone to be violent against women because they've played football against girls. It's not just something that feminists or sports theorists should be upset about who are concerned with gender equality. I mean, football players should be upset about this because it makes these assumptions about their intelligence, that you can't tell the difference between
right.
being on the field and off the field, and it makes really problematic assumptions about male sexuality, and and it values inappropriate locker room behavior. That was one of the justifications in Maddie Page's case, that the boys do things that might be viewed inappropriate in the locker room. And it values that above the possible benefits that she might gain by being allowed to participate. And that's, I think, fundamentally wrong. But a lot of people agree with the arguments that are advanced with regard to the immorality.
That was one of the things that was sort of surprising about the First Take episode, which I'll put up a link to the YouTube of that as well, was that they all four seem to be, Christian Forry seemed to be least in agreement, but even he seemed to go along with it a little bit, with this sort of idea that somehow women participating in sport with significant physical contact, like football or boxing or wrestling, would somehow be causally related to an increase in violence against women. That they all seem to just go along with that was really surprising, and not see the implication that, does that mean that it increases violence of men against men?
Right.
And if so, then that's a potentially, and that kind of gets to the argument that you mentioned from the sort of feminist point of view, or at least from some feminist point of view, that these sports ought not to be engaged in at all. I mean, if that's if that claim is true, that it does have this causal influence on violence towards others, then that's certainly a point against it. You know, whether it's sufficient to say we ought to get rid of them altogether is another issue. But that they didn't see that implication was well, I guess it shouldn't be that surprising. Having watched ESPN over the years, Skip Bayless and Stephen A. Smith are not. This is sort of par for the course for them. They always seem to say pretty foolish, stupid things. But the patronizing element of it was pretty offensive.
Yeah.
Because I mean, everything that Stephen A. Smith started off with could equally be said against men violence, and that he didn't see that was kind of surprising. And I mean, I was thinking about this, and I wonder if there's any causal even correlation between these events. I wonder if women participating more fully in these physical contact sports would actually help to decrease violence against women, because it might, women would see themselves as more physically capable, more physically powerful. Men would see them that way, and so that the bully aspect of violence against women, not that all violence against women is caused by that, but certainly some is, I think might be affected by that. Ultimately, though, I think in the end, I think you'd find, and I'm just guessing, there probably wouldn't be much of a correlation between either. But I think you'd probably be able to make a better case that it would help to decrease. What do you think about that?
I agree. I think allowing. I mean, this is part of the problem is that sex segregation in sport is coercive. In most cases, we just divide things up by gender without examining the abilities or the desires of the athletes, who might be possible participants in sports. And so there's really no opportunity for that self-discovery of, if you want to participate in a male-only sport. And one of the things that we talk about with regard to character development in sport is respecting your opponent or respecting your teammates as competitors, and how that's such a wonderful thing. And I think that could probably, those lessons, were they to be learned across genders, I think that contributes to kind of an overall respect for persons as persons. And I think you might see, I'm not sure, but I do think that that's more in the spirit of equality or equity or whatever ideal that we're aiming for in trying to challenge some of the sex segregation in sports, then splitting everybody up by gender and failing to recognize their ability, or the alternatives, and this is also very offensive. And this is something you'll see quite a couple of papers are going to address this at the upcoming conference. The Lingerie Football League, which has changed its name to the Legends Football League. But
I didn't know that.
Yes, they've changed their name from Lingerie Football League to the Legends Football League to try and convey the seriousness of the athletes, and they've also taken the garter belts off the uniforms. But they're still, incredibly, it's women playing are a particular meet conventional beauty standards in a particular way, and they're playing in their underwear. And it's, I mean, there's a lot of problems with that, and I don't see why. I don't understand why people are more upset about that than, but they get. I mean, I would love to hear Stephen A. Smith talk about that instead of a 9-year-old girl's highlight reel where she clearly kicks ass. So,
right. I suspect that the response from a Stephen A. Smith type would be, well, that the Lingerie Football League or whatever it's now, Legends, is that what you said they call it?
Yeah,
Legends, it's more like the WWE, that it's pure entertainment, that it's not really sport, and so it's a different issue. I don't know enough about it. I'm surprised that, in fact, to hear that it's even still around. I thought
they actually market themselves as, if you go to their homepage, it says, one of their taglines is, "We're an anomaly in women's sports. We're actually growing. We're actually popular."
That seems unfair, and that seems unfair. I don't know if that's true across the board for women's sport. I don't know the statistics or the ratings for things like the WNBA or women's soccer, women's tennis, and women's golf. Those all seem relatively healthy in some regards, at least. So I wanted to come back, I guess, to that claim that by participating it would help gender equality issues, at least to some degree. Now, whether it would overall or what the overall effect is hard to know, but because we see that to some degree with ethnic groups or racial groups, when you get rid of the segregation, a lot of the stereotypes about why the individuals from the particular group that was excluded wouldn't be able to participate for XY reasons, and then they're finally allowed to participate, and those reasons are shown to be pretty weak. So you saw that with integration in baseball and so on with Jackie Robinson. Concerns about whether blacks could compete in Major League Baseball were pretty quickly put to rest. And so I suspect that a lot of the concerns that people have, the kinds of concerns raised in the First Take episode, would wash away once we actually have more evidence, and we see women playing and competing with men on the field, and then we don't see these other kinds of negative effects. Is that part of the view that you're arguing for, that McDonough and Papano also seem to be arguing for?
Yeah, definitely. And that allowing participation or getting rid of sex segregation as kind of the coercive element, where we just, without questioning, just kind of assume that this is the structure of sport. I think we would see a lot of stereotypes get kind of reduced. But I also think that there would also be kind of a reification of the inferiority and injury concerns that they raise, because women, in any sport, when you're playing and you're playing to you're playing to the best of your ability and you're giving it your all, injuries are going to happen. And how those injuries get interpreted is, I'm sure that whenever you see a woman get hurt in playing with men, it's going to be attributed to her sex, rather than just, oh wow, she just happened to get hurt, like any other male athlete who also would happen to get hurt. So I think it would be kind of a one step forward, 2 steps back, 1 step forward situation.
Now, one issue that was brought up briefly in the first take, and that I imagine comes up quite a bit in discussions like this, are the physiological differences of women and men. And men, on average, are bigger, stronger. I don't know about faster.
Faster, yes, you're right.
They tend to be faster, and certainly in some sports that's going to be significant. And so they're not. It does seem like, if you have a woman who's 180 pounds playing with men that are 250, just from sheer physics, that she might be more likely to get hurt. And not just a woman, anybody who is 180 pounds playing with people that are 250 pounds, regardless of gender.
Right.
From physics would be in trouble, I would imagine, just from sheer mass issues. Now, is part of the idea, if we move towards more fully integrating across sports in terms of gender or sex, that move towards a kind of system of tiered abilities, sort of like weight classes, like in wrestling, but that you might have sort of an elite tier and then other tiers down the line based on abilities, and segregate things out that way, as opposed to based on sex.
Yes, exactly. That's what the authors of this book argue for. Other people also argue for a system that's based upon ability or other physical attributes like weight or height, because gender itself is not a strong predictor of athletic performance. It would be the same if you had a basketball team for men that are 5'7" and under, right? So you could have human beings that are physically matched to, physically matched to one another, so that that would be kind of the epitome of fairness. And we already do this in other sports. I mean, whenever I teach this, my students give me a lot of pushback on this argument, because they say, well, it would be too difficult. It would be
to do the differentiation, you mean?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Which I don't understand. I don't think that carries a lot of weight, especially given all the metrics and things that we have to kind of measure our athletic ability and our athletic progress.
Well, certainly if it's just height and weight, that would be pretty easy.
Yeah.
Because everyone knows that within some pretty close range of what their height and weight would be. And so that would be pretty fast and easy to ascertain, I would imagine.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why splitting things up by gender is so attractive, because it seems to be really easy. But yeah, height and weight or past performances, you could figure that in as well. And that would help alleviate some of these concerns about injury, and then further about inferiority, because it would show that people, even kind of more fairly matched human beings playing against each other, would reduce the risk of injury, but it would also kind of help athletes that might not succeed in other areas, who still love their sport. You could really encourage sport participation and all of the good things that come with sport participation, instead of trying to, that one of the other areas of pushback that I get from this argument is that, no one would watch.
Well, I was going to push back on that in a way, in that our spectacle attention, fans' attention, tends to be directed at the elite levels of a particular sport, whether you're talking about the Olympics or you're talking about the top professional leagues. people watch Major League Baseball more than they watch minor league baseball, and across the board. Although I guess I don't know if that's true. I think that's true as well if you looked at the NFL and versus college football in terms of overall size. I'm not 100% sure on that, but there does seem to be, our attention goes towards the very top. And if it cashes out, that very few women are, for lack of a better word, making the cut up there because they don't have the size, or they don't have the speed, or whatever the test is that most women aren't getting there. There might be a reverse effect that would institutionalize more the inferiority of women in sport, because so few people would say, well, look, so few of them are actually at the top, and so you would, instead of having the Lindsey Vonns and the Williams sisters and I'm trying to think of some other what's her name in basketball, the one who she just came out this year.
Oh, Brittany Griner?
Yeah, Brittany. All right, Brittany Griner. So in having these as potential role models, at least athletically, for young women, that they might get lost in the shuffle and not be seen by the vast majority of people, and that the ones that would be seen would be mostly men. And although that's not too different than it is now, but at least there is some, when you talk about sports that have fairly well-developed elite professional women's leagues, like tennis and golf and basketball, and to some degree swimming and skiing and other Olympic sports, there are women that are the elite of the elite that are recognized as such, and are, at least in some ideal sense, at the same level of men in terms of their elite status, because they're not being compared to each other. But then when they're being compared to each other, the Williams sisters, as good as they are at tennis, I don't know where they would end up being ranked if you ranked them against the men, but it would be surprisingly low, I think, to a lot of people, given how good they are. I doubt they would be in the top 25. If even in the top 100, I don't know. I don't know enough about tennis to make that claim definitively. But just when you look at the serve speed of women, the fastest servers don't even come close to the average male serve speed. So it would make it hard, I think, to compete at the elite level. So what's the response to that sort of pushback, or that counter?
Well, there's a couple of points I'd like to make, and the first is, some people would say, look, it doesn't matter if you still have men in the elite. It's that in the elite levels of sport, as long as women are permitted to try out and develop their athletic talents, then we have a system that's more fair than we have now. Okay. I'm not sure if I totally buy that, but the reasoning, in part, that that attempts to support that position is that women have made tremendous progress in sports over the past 7,500 years, because they've had more opportunities, and they've done say that they're trying to catch up with men, and their athletic progress has just been exponentially higher than been progressing because they've had these opportunities. And but there are also things that are holding women back. Girls don't get as much physical activity as boys at a young age. They're not really introduced to sports. They're introduced to certain sports that adhere to conventional ideals of femininity. And once we get rid of some of those barriers, they're also discouraged a lot more by coaches. And that's a problem that needs to be fixed too. But if we can remove some of those barriers, then maybe women will catch up with men eventually. I'm not sure about that, because it does seem to ignore important physiological differences. But there's also a problem, and this is my second point, with how we kind of value the physical attributes that we have in our sports system currently. Like you said, we seem to value, a lot of action and strength and physical contact and speed. But there might be other physical attributes that are really important that women are better at than men. And Jane English makes this point in her classic piece on sex equality in sports, where she argues, look, women tend to be more flexible than men. So maybe we all have a moral obligation. She doesn't say exactly this, I'm paraphrasing. But maybe we have a moral obligation to value sports more that seem to value women's attributes more, like gymnastics or diving, and women also tend to be better at endurance events. If you look at the marathon times, you see the gender gap between the 100 meters and the marathon. The gap is quite large at the 100 meters, but it closes. It doesn't close, but it closes significantly at the marathon. But when you go beyond the marathon, you start looking at ultra running events. Women consistently seem to outperform men, and they tend to do very well at endurance events. And
my understanding is things like archery and shooting sports, women do quite well at as well, because of their, at least this is the way it's been reported to me, physiologically they just tend to have lower blood pressure, and a higher blood pressure interferes with your shot, and so women particularly, and I've been told that women make great snipers in the military for that reason. And so I imagine that translates into certain shooting sports and archery and things like that as well.
Yeah. So should we be valuing those sports more so than than what the sports that are commercially popular now? I'm not sure. I like American football. I like seeing people hit each other, within reason. So it's really tough, and I'm not sure if I want to go so far to make a claim that we should not be watching certain things in favor of watching other sports that might not be as exciting.
That doesn't seem fair to me. People are going to like what they like within a certain space, as long as you're not talking about snuff films and other things like that. And within a certain space, people ought to be free to like what they like, and it doesn't seem. But
I think I think it would be a good thing if we could be a little more conscientious about why we like the things that we like. My students have a very hard time articulating why they would rather see, two basketball teams really school each other on dunks instead of playing a solid passing game where there's a lot of three-point shots. Or why they like American football more or hockey, or more so than, than soccer or other sports. I think we could try and be better consumers of sports by being clear about the reasons about why we watch sports, and I think we could become better spectators in that regard.
That's a big part of why we teach philosophy of sport, is to try, and philosophy in general, right, is to try to encourage people to examine their beliefs and their values, right? And so I think that's, when it comes to sport, that's an important process as well. And it's one of the eye-opening things, I'm sure you've experienced this too, as you teach sports ethics. Students who play sports every day and are consumed by sports all the time, how little thought they've given to a lot of the questions and issues that we raise within the philosophy of sport, and to see them begin to address those questions and begin the process of thinking about them, at least in some cases, that's why we teach, right?
Right.
I wanted to come back a little bit to the issue here of moving towards a system where we begin much more integration. Because one, and kind of related to what we're talking about, is one, I think, possibly unintended consequence of this would be the demise of certain elite women's sports.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's not an issue in American football, right? I mean, the Legion Football League is not an elite football league. I know there are other more legitimate semi-pro women's football leagues, but nothing on the order of the NFL or at the college level. And so there's no issue there in terms of, well, if we let women play, we're going to undermine, the Women's National Football League. There's nothing like that.
Right.
So I don't think there's any, I see no reason to hold back on that. But when we start talking about things like the WNBA or tennis or golf and some of the other Olympic sports, I think there is a concern there that you would see something like, like when we integrated baseball, the Negro Leagues went away. I'm not, it overall seems to be a good thing. Now, the loss of the Negro Leagues in itself isn't necessarily a good thing, but the integration of baseball seems to be a good thing.
Right.
And if that's the cost, maybe that's an acceptable price. Do you see that as a parallel situation to something like the WNBA or the LPGA or women's tennis, or is there space or some reasons to try to preserve those divisions there?
There are definitely reasons to try to preserve some of these divisions, and this is a debate that's been and that goes back to some of these larger questions about the values of our current sports system. And you saw this in when the NCAA started to take over women's sports. I mean, they used to only be concerned with men's sports. In fact, they paid some $300,000 to lobby against Title IX in the 70s because they thought that they didn't see women's sports as being financially lucrative, and they wanted to let physical educators and the AIAW to take care of women's sports, and they would take care of men's sports. But then they changed their mind, and the model that was women's-only sports in the United States, which was based around, it was criticized for being kind of anti-competitive. But it was based more around these values of character development and camaraderie. It was a common occurrence for intercollegiate teams to play one another and then all eat dinner together, which is kind of unheard of today. And so I think some of those traditions that one in particular got lost, and I would think that traditions like that would be desirable for lots of reasons. Mm-hmm. One reason that is commonly advanced to preserve women's only spaces is that you have this historically disenfranchised group of people that ought to have some agency over their existence and what they value. And this is the one point where McDonough and Papineau in their book, they try to kind of argue for women's-only spaces as long as they are voluntary. So if you decide, maybe sex integration in sports, that's great, but it might be better for women to decide to split off and have a women's-only league where they can kind of cultivate their own values. That raises some questions about there being kind of gender-specific features of morality and things like that that probably could be examined further. while I'm for sex integration in a lot of cases, and I think we should be paying more attention to ability and to the ways that we use sex as a coercive force in sports, I'm for having women's-only leagues, especially as, girls are still disenfranchised in this culture and all over the world, to try and develop role models to showcase their athletics, women's elite athletics in a women's-only context. I think there's a lot of benefit to that.
Mm-hmm. Does that cut the other way as well for men's-only leagues? Or so having a sort of system where you'd have maybe 3 classifications, you'd have an open division, I guess, and then a men's division and a women's division? Or is it just, we ought to just have open and women's? Or just one, just open?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Is it maybe sports specific, or is it something that's kind of historically based? That given our historical circumstances and the contemporary history of women in society, that it makes sense now to have open and women only, but that maybe with a different set of circumstances or a different culture, some different arrangement would make sense?
I like the idea of there being kind of a sport-specific solution, because each sport seems to have its own set of values, and some sports are more welcoming to girls and women than others. And I think, and also they seem to they do value different physiological attributes. Each sport, whether you have, like you talked about earlier with riflery and archery, I mean, those are very different athletic abilities than hockey. Mm-hmm. So I think there could be sport-specific solutions to these issues that would allow athletes in these different sport cultures to decide how to kind of deal with some of these issues.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think to the extent that we can encourage voluntary association among individuals here, that's the best solution overall. And there might be some call for push in certain, or encouragement in certain other directions, but leaving it to the athletes to figure out how to sort some of this out might be best to some large degree, rather than having it be top down from either the government or some of these institutional setups like the NCAA, but really have it more to the athletes, which would allow, I think, more points of view to surface, and more creative arrangements than a group of people might be able to think of in a conference room.
Yeah. The counterpoint to that, though, is, well, what if men voluntarily decide that they want to have a men's-only club?
Right. Well, I think there ought to be some symmetry there, that if we think it's okay for women to segregate themselves off, we ought to think that that's, at least all of the things being equal, that men ought to have that right of free association as well, and that those who want to play together can play together in a mixed arrangement as well. I mean, it seems like you'd have to come up. There seems to be a burden here to try to show that that one gender can segregate itself off, and while the other can't. That it seems like we either say, well, you can't do it, no matter your gender, or you can, and not say, well, this group can, but this group can't. That seems to be unfair as well.
Yeah, the crux of the reasoning kind of given for saying, well, sorry, you cannot have men's clubs that exclude women, is based upon this historical disenfranchisement idea that yes, like you said, if all other things being equal, people should be free to associate with one another and draw boundaries however they please. The problem is that women being, having been historically disenfranchised and that disenfranchisement being institutionalized in a variety of problematic ways, women can't. It's not an equal choice. It's not just a free association that we can decide. Okay, you guys can go over here and have a men's only club, and women you can have a women's only club. But I'm not sure where exactly I fall on that idea, because the burden seems to be on women then to try and show that they have some special claim to free association or against men having exclusive men's only clubs, if that makes any sense.
No, it does, and I mean, these are complicated issues, not just in sport, but in political society and civil society and business and other areas, of how to deal with historical discrimination and disenfranchisement, and how to move forward. All right.
Right.
To a situation where those things aren't what are the deciding factors anymore. That things are decided more on merit or ability and so on. And our societies are trying different things to try to figure that out, and it's not an easy solution in any way. Or there's no cost-free solution. That whatever solution you come up with, if you decide, well, we'll just do it based purely on ability, segregated out by, as we were talking about earlier, certain metrics, physical metrics in some way, and just sort it out that way. And then, when we have the problems that we talked about in terms of, well, what happens then to, the LPGA and so on, and the effects that might have, or we set it up in a way where we continue or kind of push the disenfranchisement the other way in a sense, right? Where we sort of try to shift the balance to try to equalize things before moving forward, and it's and then there might be other possibilities to try to balance those things out. So that it's always hard.
Exactly.
I mean, when it comes to football and whether women should be free to play, I'm totally on board with it, and I'd love to see Samantha Gordon, to continue to play if she so chooses, and not be prevented by the league or that she plays in, or some other forces from playing if she so chooses and is able to continue to compete. I think when we get to things where there are the developed elite professional women's leagues in their own right, then there's some concern there about the effect, or the at least on my part, the effect that integration would have on those leagues, and whether that's a cost worth paying or not. And I just started thinking about these issues based on your paper. So.
Oh, great.
I get not completely. I mean, start thinking about it more intently. It's not that I didn't know that these issues were out there, but I've spent the last week thinking much more about some of these issues. So it's an interesting topic, and I look forward to actually hearing you speak when we're out in California. So I'm looking forward to that. Sounds like you have some inside information about some other of the talks out there, or are there talks out? Does the website have all the talks up now? I haven't looked.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I have to admit I am basing that on inside information, but from what I know, we're going to have a really interesting conference, and it's going to be fantastic. I think we'll have a lot of great discussions about some really important issues facing sports and philosophy of sport more particularally. So.
Well, that always is the way the conferences are. I love going to IAPS. It's great fun, and I can't wait. It's always a lot of fun. Always learn some interesting thing, and always have great conversations in the group of people is always just a great group of people. It's a very fun and inviting conference, and I know we've talked about that before as well. So, we are running out of time.
So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Again, I apologize for the feedback on the line, but this has been the Sports Ethicist Show. You can find us at sportsethicist.com, Facebook and Twitter, and you can email the show at sportsethicist@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
It's time for the annual Festa Italiana, held every summer at Boylan Catholic High School, featuring the Italian culture, rides, games, live entertainment, and music. Oh, and the food? Simply the best Italian and American foods around. And it's affordable for everyone. Just $5 to enjoy the 35th Festa Italiana. Come to the Rockford Festa Italiana August 2nd through 4th.